Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm pleased to present Ian Alden to today's webinar. He's going to be presenting Help Wanted, 5 tips for hiring and keeping good employees. I always like to work with Ian on his presentations because he gives such valuable information to all our small businesses out there. I also want to remind everyone that the New Mexico Small Business Development Center strongly encourages all New Mexico small businesses to be aware of the risk to their cybersecurity. We have a whole series of cybersecurity webinars available on demand, pre-recorded on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to be chatting over the link for everyone to pick that up and take advantage of our webinar catalog. I also want to remind everyone that Ian is great at picking up any questions throughout the entire webinar that you may have. So type those questions into the Q&A and he will get to them. Ian, turning it over to you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another fun workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about ways to hire and keep good employees. I know this is a very hot topic nowadays with the tight labor market and with increasing pressure from all sides between inflation and just a lot of businesses struggling to keep the doors open. So before we get into all that, I've got a few housekeeping notes here. There's a number of resources that it's worth really looking at, especially now with the Delta variant sweeping through. There's a lot of ways you can maintain a COVID-safe workplace. That's important now as it was back when this pandemic first started. So be sure to check out some of the resources on this slide to learn more about how you can maintain COVID-safe workplaces. Some other housekeeping notes, if your microphone were to come unmuted, and they should be muted by default, but just make sure you stay muted. Be sure your Zoom ratio is set to fit window so you can see everything on these slides. We're having a little bit of technical issues with that a little earlier today, so make sure that you can see all these slides, and if you can't, be sure to adjust the Zoom ratio accordingly. We're going to be using the Q&A function to take questions. And like Leslie said, I'm taking them throughout the presentation. So if at any time you have a question, don't feel like you need to wait to the end. Just speak up in the Q&A and I'm happy to stop and take your questions as they come. If you do decide to hold your questions until the very end, just write down your question and note the slide number it relates to. You can see that slide number in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We're going to go through all of the presentation, but before we do, I want to draw your attention to some of the other great workshops that the NMSBDC is offering in the next couple of days. We've got Cash is King, Cash Management for Your Small Business, Who's Stealing Your Art, How to Detect Online Picture Plagiarism, which is actually a really technically interesting one, E-commerce and Alternative Selling Methods, just great stuff to know as you're working your way back into business. Basic steps to starting a business in New Mexico really helps you set the foundations right. For all that and more, go to nmsbdc.org. They've got no-cost business counseling, loan application assistance, and a number of great workshops and other resources available to you. So be sure to check out all that the SBDC has to offer. Quick disclosure before we get started, this is all just for informational purposes. Obviously, I'm not any one specific attorney here. I'm just offering some general information that might be useful to you. Highly recommend that you sit down and talk with a professional consultant or other advisor. If you're not sure where to start, the SBDC's no-cost business counseling is a great place to start. So definitely sit down with someone once you have a sense of the material that we're presenting here so that you can come up with something tailored to you. So I like to start these just by highlighting why this presentation matters. And obviously I don't need to tell you all as small business owners, but the labor market is complicated right now. You can see that in just the general headlines from the last couple of weeks. Tight labor market returns the upper hand to American workers from the Wall Street Journal. Return to office, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. Bloomberg, the Great Resignation, as it's being called in other places. Overwhelming majority of businesses report difficulty hiring. I know this working with my own clients. I mean, I'm a business attorney and consultant, and I work with clients as they plan strategically for their startups, for growth cycles. And hiring is one of the biggest impediments right now to small businesses growing and taking that next step into expansion. It's hard to open up another location, for example, if you don't think you're going to get the employees to run it properly. And this is a problem across the country. Across the world in some senses, but really across the country, because there's a lot of converging factors in the United States that are making it hard to hire people. There's the popular refrain right now, people are living large on expanded unemployment benefits and don't want to work. A lot of my small business clients just come out firing with that one. And I'm not here to tell anyone that they're wrong in their assumptions. It's worth really looking at the causes, though, of why it's hard to hire people. And so I broke down the expanded unemployment benefits so you can see what that really looks like and does to the labor market. The traditional unemployment model in New Mexico, depending on what the employees were making in their previous job, would pay up to $461 a week. The expanded unemployment that's currently in place adds $300 to that, which makes it $761 a week before taxes, which averages out to about $19 an hour. So if you're hiring some of these minimum wage positions, or even some of these quote unquote living wage positions that pay 15 an hour, you are reckoning with unemployment benefits that pay 19 an hour. And so you are competing with unemployment. It's the honest truth. But that unemployment expires in September, at which point the benefits go back down to 461 a week, which averages out to about 11.52 an hour, which again, New Mexico's unemployment or minimum wage is about 10.50 an hour. So if you're hiring someone, if you're trying to hire minimum wage positions and you're trying to hire people off of the unemployment rolls, you're still going to be competing with unemployment, because you've always been competing with unemployment. Before the minimum wage hikes that took effect this year, New Mexico's minimum wage was somewhere in the ballpark of 750, 950, and it shifts. I don't keep track of all the minimum wage changes, but the point is that is an honest reality that you have to reckon with, no matter what time you're living in. If the government has expanded these benefits or not, you have to compete with that. And similarly, even right now, I mean, for skilled positions that are paying more than the minimum wage, you're competing with that to a point, but there's other factors at play that explain why you are having a hard time hiring people. Those factors, you know, they include everything from people got a taste of work from home and they don't want to give that up. People shifted careers during the pandemic. We saw this with people who were working in restaurants and what a lot of economists call necessity jobs, where you need to work just so you can make the minimum rent and survive another 2 weeks. The pandemic and the government assistance gave people the breathing room to shift from low-wage restaurant jobs to retail jobs, or from retail jobs to office jobs, or from office jobs to maybe middle management jobs. I mean, it created social mobility. So there's a lot of explanations for why people are having difficulty hiring. But the reality is, regardless of why you're having so much difficulty hiring, you're competing with other employers right now in a tight labor market for employees who have experienced these unemployment benefits, they've experienced work from home, they've experienced some of the flexibility and freedom that they're not willing to give up easily. And so if you want to hire, you've got a few choices. Obviously, you can wait out the unemployment benefits that have been expanded. Eventually, those are going to go back to what they were before, which means more people are going to be entering the labor market at that time. It'll balance out a little, but not completely. A lot of these employees are moving up the social mobility ladder for good. And so if you want to hire them, you're going to have to follow a few of these tips that I'm going to outline here to get those employees on board. So I'm going to give you 5 tips, and I break it down like this. The first thing you need to do when you're trying to hire or keep your employees is know your needs. The second thing is hire smart. You know, don't just do the bare minimum, but actually have a strategy for how you want to hire your employees so that you're hiring the right people who are going to stick with you. The third, and I know this is glaringly obvious and not easy for small businesses to do, I know, but pay competitively. It's a competitive workforce, a competitive labor market, and if you want to attract and keep good talent, you're going to have to pay them. The fourth is keep an eye on company culture. And this is huge. I mean, I've seen company culture break employers who are paying well above the market average for their employees. And the fifth is mind your reputation, which will, it forms sort of a circle and feeds into itself. But I'm going to cover all five in sequence here. And again, if at any time you have any questions that you want to answer or just ideas you want to brainstorm, send them out in the Q&A, and I'm happy to have this be a dialogue with you. Hiring. When we talk about know your needs, it's really important to know what it is you're looking for before you start hiring. And it's important to understand what your business really needs and can sustain both in the short, mid, and long term to the best you can. I mean, long term, who knows, but short to mid term is important to kind of balance that out. And I give you an example right here. I've worked with clients who had a habit of overhiring and then laying off the excess hires once things slowed down. You know, they got into a bit of a busy patch and said, oh, I need to hire a bunch of employees. And then as soon as that business tapered off because the business trends were somewhat seasonal, they would lay those workers off. They weren't seasonal hires. They weren't temporary hires. They were permanent hires who then got the boot as soon as business leveled off. And over time, businesses develop a reputation, which I'll cover in point 5. But if you have a reputation of overhiring and then laying off your employees, future employees might see that as an unstable place to work, and that might make them go away. Businesses have, you know, New Mexico, it's a small state with insular communities, and in those communities, employers build a reputation. They just do. And so if you want to be able to attract good talent, you don't want to have the reputation of hiring and firing in such a way that it creates instability for your employees. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out here. Really consider trying to do some economic forecasting to understand what your needs are before you expand. And that might look like considering previous year's revenue and revenue cycles and saying, okay, every July through September, we get really busy. And then from September through July, we're pretty stable and we couldn't support a big expansion. Economic forecasting and modeling is a big, it's a big opportunity for you to really plan your hires for the long term. But probably the bigger thing I'm going to recommend doing here when it comes to knowing your needs, figure out what you're hiring for before you try to hire it. I've personally been in job interviews where the job was so ill-defined that we got to the interview and the employer realized as I was asking them questions that they really didn't know what they were hiring for. They wanted to replace maybe the Swiss Army knife of the company who got a better offer, but they didn't really know what it is that they wanted their new hires to do. They just knew that they wanted them to fill a hole. But if you don't know what that hole is and you don't define the duties of your new hires, you're not really going to know how to adequately vet your new hires. And those new hires aren't going to know what's expected of them when they take the job. So coming up with a list of job duties and descriptions, it just sets reasonable expectations for everyone. It's going to let your employees know what's expected of them, and it's going to help you know what to expect of those employees so you don't get a few weeks down the road and they're not doing exactly what you expect because you never told them what you expect. So come up with a list, a good, solid, articulated list of job duties for the role you're hiring for. It's just good planning. That old adage, prior planning prevents poor performance, really holds true here. You know, it's one of the most important steps you can take. So yeah, that is know your needs in a nutshell. It's point 1. Point 2, hire smart. And I'm going to give you some examples here. There's a number of ways you can find employees. One of the most common ways nowadays is these recruitment websites. I give a few examples here, and again, note the SBDC does not recommend or endorse any of them. This is just a list of examples that I pulled off a search engine, but there's about 100 more of them. They've actually become so common that employers can't really list on them all because it's just too burdensome every time you have an opening. So you pick a few popular ones and you try your luck on them. These recruitment websites, they're perused by job seekers from all industries and walks of life. And so you're going to get a lot of resumes from these typically, but you're going to be drawing resumes from a much larger pool. Oftentimes, a good chunk of the resumes you're going to get are from people who are just trying their luck, who might not be particularly qualified or suited for the role you're recruiting for. And so it's a mixed bag because you're going to reach a larger audience with these websites, but the applicants you're going to get are maybe underqualified or unqualified. But then again, you might luck out because they reach a much wider audience. And so maybe you're going to get a very qualified applicant from them who might not have seen your job listing otherwise. And so that's one way you can find your employees. Another way is staffing firms. I'm not going to list them all, but there's firms who you actually sign a contract with these firms to help you hire people. And these firms go out and they gather resumes. They do the initial vetting of these employees and they figure out, okay, we think based on what our client has told us about the position that these few applicants from the giant pool of resumes we received are uniquely qualified, and so we are going to connect them. Then once the staffing firms connect you to those potential employees, you interview them yourselves if you think it's a good match. You typically pay the staffing firm under the contract some percentage of the annual pay that you would have paid that employee. So it's almost like a commission-based system with these staffing firms, but they take a lot of the hiring pressure off of you, especially if you don't have your own internal human resources department or representative or someone whose job it is to really vet the resumes. I've got a lot of small business clients where the owners are swamped just trying to keep good relations with their customers and with their clients. And maybe those owners are out in the field doing the work and they just don't have time to do everything that needs to be done for hiring, in which case staffing firms are a good resource to consider if you, the small business owner, have the money to pay the staffing firm and don't have the time to do that kind of work yourself. They're an interesting resource to consider. And what's important with the staffing firms is that you do your homework on them, because staffing firms tend to have specialties or fields that they recruit for. A lot of staffing firms are strictly information technology or programming or web development. Some staffing firms are specific to healthcare industries, hiring nurses or doctors for temporary or contract assignments. So depending on your needs, you're going to find different staffing firms for those needs. So it's important to really do your homework before you engage one, because the quality of your applicants will vary. But let's say you don't have a lot of luck with these general recruitment websites or the staffing firms. Depending on the job you're hiring for and depending on how your community works, you might bypass that altogether and go the more traditional route of newspapers, listings on social media sites, or profession-specific publications. And a good example of this is if you're hiring a lawyer. We have the Bar Bulletin for the State Bar. It's a giant publication that the bar puts out twice a month, and employers can list their classified ads in it. That is something that lets you specifically reach people who read the Bar Bulletin, which is going to be predominantly licensed attorneys and other legal practitioners. Maybe you get some paralegals reading it, but I think they have their own publication. So there's profession-specific publications. I know accountants and CPAs have their own. There's trade publications for electricians and such. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that you can reach these specifically trained candidates, bypassing the more general recruitment processes. And then finally, there's networking and word of mouth, which a lot of positions, you might be interested to find that a lot of positions never get listed. They never have job listings on these websites. They don't go through staffing firms or classified ads, because the networking opportunities within a community as small as the one we have here in New Mexico or in Albuquerque, for example, lends itself to networking opportunities, whether through events held by a professional association or contacts, especially if you're collegial, I guess you could say, with your rival companies, and maybe one is laying off people, another is hiring. There's lots of opportunities and different ways to refer people from one company to the next. And so networking and word of mouth hiring, it does work. And often it has the advantage of at least having one person vouch for the job candidate that you're looking at. The downside to it is that you miss out on the opportunity to hire from a wider pool of applicants. Maybe the person that is being referred to you seems great, but there are so many more qualified candidates who you're overlooking by hiring through word of mouth or networking. And so what I tell my clients when I'm doing consulting work is, don't employ just one of these. List the job on some of these recruitment websites. Maybe use some of these targeted classified ads as well. And then it never hurts to solicit a few candidates through your networking contact or from word of mouth. Maybe someone is going to see your job listing and say, hey, I know that employer, I know that business owner, and I know someone who'd be perfect for the job, so I'm going to refer them. And then they'd reach out to you directly. These aren't mutually exclusive things, except staffing firms. Typically, if you use a staffing firm, a lot of those work into their contracts that you can't separately list the job or recruit, because that would undercut their own recruitment efforts. So staffing firms might be mutually exclusive, but the rest of them you can use in tandem with one another to have a really strategic hiring process. And this matters. Where you find your employees matters, because I'm going to give you a fun example of this. For a time, certain government agencies were hiring through social media websites, specifically MySpace. And this was after MySpace's fall from popularity. And the results were pretty predictable in terms of the applicants they got and the quality of the hires and the longevity of those hires. If you hire poorly, if you don't strategically source your potential employees, results may be subpar, let's put it that way. So, if you're going to hire a skilled position, for example, like an electrician or a plumber or whatever, and there's trade publications out there that these people pay attention to, maybe give those a look and see what kind of applicants you get from it. It's worth, as you go through hiring cycles and you hire and you lose people and you hire and you lose people, it's really worth looking at the candidates that you got from different recruitment sources, because you're getting consistently bad results. If you're getting poor hires that don't last long, maybe hire from a different source. It's worth reevaluating this time after time so that you're not missing out on better opportunities to hire elsewhere. And so that's hire smart in a nutshell. It really just means think strategically about how you hire and don't just do what seems most obvious in the moment, because you might find that there's better ways to get better candidates with less effort. So the next part, and this is going to be the big one, and this is the painful one. And I don't like telling my clients this because, and I don't have to tell you this as small business owners, times are tough, inflation is high, the cost of materials is getting higher, the cost of labor is getting higher, and charging customers more can lead to diminished business. And so you're between a rock and a hard place already. And recognizing that, I still have to be honest and upfront with you and tell you that competitive pay is necessary to find and to keep good talent. And keeping them is really key because, and I gave a presentation with Nick Baker a few weeks or months ago about this topic of retaining key employees. And one thing that I get from a lot of small business owners, especially the older ones, is this expectation of employee loyalty. And I have to tell them and walk them through this. Employee loyalty doesn't mean what it used to, because employee benefits aren't what they used to be. You look at what it was like for older generations when they entered the workforce. The greatest generation, a lot of the older baby boomers, not the younger ones necessarily, but a lot of the older ones entered the workforce with a real possibility of a pension, something where if you worked with one employer for long enough, you would be rewarded with retirement that would pay you throughout your life. It's a sort of security that made working for one employer very attractive. People wanted to stay with that employer because they had this thing to look forward to. That's not the case anymore. Some estimates suggest that as few as 5% of millennials have access to a defined benefits or pension plan in the workforce now. Generation Z, even less, because of government restructuring of pensions. A lot of government entities, at least at the state and locality level, are getting rid of their pensions and coming up with 401k matching, 403b, stuff that you can get in the private sector. And so as fewer employers offer pensions, employees' expectations are shifting, because at the same time as those pensions are going away, more studies are showing that working class adults can increase their earnings potential over their lifetime by job hopping. And this might surprise a lot of you, but if you look at the raises that employees are given typically, it's usually some percent, 2%, 3%, maybe 5% even. Sometimes that keeps up with or exceeds inflation. 2% right now isn't even keeping up with inflation, but it's a fixed percent. But those same employees, as they gain years on the job and become more attractive to rival employers, they might get a $10,000 or $20,000 salary increase by going to a rival. And so, I hear this a lot. I thought employee loyalty meant something. My employees are so disloyal by going to a competitor. But the bottom line is, if you're not doing something to keep those employees there, it's the height of insanity to expect them to stay against that backdrop of better opportunities elsewhere. And it's not just money. And I want to make that clear. One of the other reasons employees leave their employers is advancement. They want to be able to show that they are growing in their careers, taking on more responsibility, and having more opportunity, whether that's as an owner, shareholder, partner, or otherwise. There's a lot of reasons employees leave, especially the good ones. And that's important to consider as well. The good employees are the ones most likely to have opportunities elsewhere and to take advantage of those opportunities. Employees who underperform or who really don't excel at their job and don't learn from it, they're not the best candidates to leave. And so what I'm really proposing here for you to consider is to keep the good employees, not the bad, the good. And so we look at what competitive pay really means. There's obviously the base salary, because if your employee is making 10% less than they could be elsewhere, you're very likely going to lose them at some point unless you start making corrections to their salary. But you also have to look at compensation as a whole. And I've experienced this, colleagues my age have experienced this. If an employer is offering me a little bit less in terms of a base salary, but much better health, dental, and vision plans, I'm going to go probably with the employer that offers the better health plan. And there's a reason for that. If employer A is offering me X number of dollars and a health plan that has an annual out-of-pocket max of $13,000 a year and a $7,500 deductible, which is so high. And employer B is offering me $5,000 less a year, but a health plan with a $500 deductible and a $1,500 annual out-of-pocket max, I'm going to look at employer B and I might really go with them. So compensation and competitive pay, it's more than just the base salary. It's these other things that you can offer: health, dental, and vision insurance. And I'm just going to tell you this as a helpful hint. One of the worst things that you can do is offer health plan reimbursement and say, go shop on the marketplace and I'll reimburse you. Because the health plan that you can get on the marketplace, the deductibles and out-of-pocket maxes are so high, where you could take that same reimbursement and you could apply it towards an employer-sponsored health plan with a bit more work. And maybe the employee has to pay more. Maybe they have more of a buy-in into that health plan, but you have more bargaining power as an employer to get a better health plan for your employees than they could ever get on their own on that exchange. So keep that in mind as part of competitive pay. Really look at how you can maximize the value of the health plan, the dental, the vision, in attracting some of these would-be employees. There's also the performance-based incentives, and I break this down into two types. There's employee-based, like employee performance-based, which is if the employee does well, they're rewarded directly on their paychecks. And then there's company performance-based incentives. And what that means is, let's say the company did really well this year. You might recognize the employees for that with an annual bonus around Christmas time, based on how the company did. That gives the employees some skin in the game and making sure that the company does well. Employee performance-based incentives give the employees motivation to do well themselves without caring so much how the company does. But the other one, company performance-based, really makes the employee invested in how the company is doing. There's the retirement stuff, of course, retirement plans with employer matching and low vesting timeframes. So if the employer is kicking in 3, 4, 5% or something of employee contributions, that goes a long way. It makes the employees have some skin in the game, and it makes the employer have some skin in the game. It's nowhere near the expense of a pension, which again, the days of the pensions are gone, which terrible for my generation, but we'll deal with that in a few decades. But if the employer matches the 401k contributions to a point, that's very attractive as compensation. And when I say low vesting, I've seen some 401ks with a 5-year vesting period where the employer contributions only vest after 5 years. And if I'm a prospective employee, I'm going to see that as a big gamble where I don't trust that my employer, if I left after 2 or 3 years for some reason or another, I wouldn't get the employer match. And maybe I'm better off just starting my career elsewhere, where I'm a little more confident that I'm going to get that employer match if things go awry. So low vesting timeframes. Paid time off is huge. And it's getting to be more mandatory in states like New Mexico and states with more liberal leaning governments. Not to get political about this, but you can look at a map of the United States and you can probably guess where paid time off is mandated and where it isn't. So, you can go with the mandatory minimums, which fine, but if you really want to set yourself apart, have good paid time off policies, vacation and sick leave. And it's not just a matter of making it available, but it's a matter of making the employee feel encouraged to take it. Because I've worked for employers. I know tons of people in my profession, especially younger attorneys who have worked for employers, where they dangled PTO, paid time off, but then they made it so incredibly difficult to take that the net effect was no one really had PTO. And if you're doing that to your employees, they're going to burn out, they're going to go elsewhere. It's a quality of life thing, and it's a company culture thing, which I'll talk about in a second. But having a good PTO offering means having it and letting and encouraging your employees to take it. Because I'm telling you now, an employee who takes their PTO and feels comfortable using it is going to be a less burnt out employee, and they're going to be a happier employee. Competitive pay can also include things that don't necessarily cost you money. And every time I tell a prospective employer this, they lock up a little bit. A lot of my clients, there's this understanding of the work balance model that hasn't changed in about 70 years, but has changed in the last 5 to 10 with the advent of modern technologies. We saw this with the pandemic and with Zoom, where employers learned just how much you can do remotely. And to the surprise of a lot of employers, you can do a lot remotely. It requires a rethink of your supervision and your management strategies, but it creates a very nice opportunity to give employees flexibility and freedom that goes a long way towards making them happy employees who want to stick with an employer. So some of the examples here are employer-sponsored wellness initiatives, which can look like a number of things. There's a lot of really hokey stuff out there, but then there's some stuff that employees really care about. Flexible work arrangements, work from home, telling an employee that, maybe you need them in the office some days for meetings or to create a company culture that feels cohesive, but maybe give them 1 to 2 days a week where they can work from home. That doesn't necessarily cost you anything as long as that employee is doing their job and being productive, but it gives the employees something that they really want. And I'm going to tell you right now, personally, if my employer didn't offer some of this flexible work arrangement or work from home stuff, and I was approached by another potential employer who offered it and paid me something comparable, I'd strongly consider taking it. If you look at the news articles, and I pointed out just a few headlines, people specifically of the younger generations, millennials and Generation Z, are increasingly looking for these flexible work-life balance arrangements so that they can start having kids and tending to those kids while working and balancing it a little easier than the traditional model where you have to be in the office 8 to 5, which means you have to find childcare and pay for daycare, etc. There's a lot of that goes into these considerations, but the bottom line is, if you're offering flexible work arrangements, you become that much more attractive as an employer. And then there's other stuff like flexible scheduling options, the 4x10 workday. The 40-hour work week has been the staple of American employers for, like I said, about 70 years. But you could keep that 40-hour expectation and give employees some flexibility as to when they do the 40 hours. Because if you have 4x10 work days and you have enough coverage throughout the week to make sure that your needs as an employer are being met, you can give employees something that's very attractive to them, because they can then have 3-day weekends, which actually helps to stave off burnout. If you look at a lot of these studies of employee burnout, employees who have 4x10 options tend to last longer without some of these symptoms of burnout. So if you offer stuff like that, that makes you an attractive employer. Bonus PTO accruals, where let's say someone wants to work overtime and you don't want to pay them overtime money, or maybe they don't want to work the overtime money, and you do this in such a way that you're still complying with labor laws. And there's ways to thread the needle here, but if you give them bonus PTO accruals, if you give them bonus PTO accruals for their overtime, and you do that in such a way that it complies with labor laws, that might be a way to improve employee satisfaction, which makes you a more attractive employer. Remember, this isn't just about finding good employees, but about keeping the good employees you already have. And stuff like this, if you can make it work for you with your business model, and not every employer can, and that's just the reality of it. But if you can, that is a great way to make yourself more attractive to employees that might not necessarily cost you extra money. And then, of course, paid parental leave. That's something that society is really pushing now, since we are the only developed country that doesn't really guarantee it. If you are an employer that does provide it, you're a very attractive employer. So a few things to keep in mind here. You need to be constantly reevaluating your employees' compensation, because if you gave your employees a big raise 5 years ago, that was 5 years ago. Or if you're giving your employees 2% raises or something pegged to inflation, you're not keeping up with the Joneses. You really need to make sure that you are paying your employees at least what their peers are getting in the marketplace, give or take, because there's a lot, like I said, benefits, work-life balance, culture, et cetera. There's a lot that goes into this. It's not just pay, but you can't be so far behind the curve that your employees could go somewhere else and get a 10% bump automatically. You're gonna lose people. think strategically about how you give them raises, because again, if you just have this arbitrary 2% raise standard and that's what you're sticking to, that's not going to fly in a tight labor market. It probably will in a looser labor market where there's more employees and opportunities. And if you're in that advantaged bargaining position, then great. A lot of this is just maintaining the status quo for you. But if you're fighting for employees, you really want to make sure that you're keeping up with the Joneses. And this third point is something that I see a lot, and it really, really rubs people the wrong way. If you have a position that you have a lot of employees filling, customer service rep, product manager, etc., if they're doing roughly the same job and you're paying your employees starkly different salaries because you realize that this employee over here demands this much and this employee didn't bargain as well, so I'm going to pay them like 5 or 10% less. Employees talk. You can mandate till you're blue in the face that employees should not talk about their salaries, but they do, they will. And when one employee realizes that they have been paid substantially less than their colleague for the exact same work, they will not stay with you. They just won't, not in the long run, unless you offer them something that's really going to smooth things over, like a retroactive pay raise, which most employers aren't in a position to do. They don't budget for that. So if you are starting off on that foot, just realize that you will lose some key talent if you have that pay disparity going on. I've left jobs over that. I've known people who've left jobs over that. And more to the point, I've advised and counseled clients who have gotten into labor disputes over that. I mean, the causes of action were pretty shaky at best. I don't think that employees had a real claim there, but it causes problems. So if your goal is to keep happy employees and keep good employees, really think about whether or not you want those pay disparities because you think you can save a few bucks over time. It can cause problems. Now we're going to get into company culture, which there's a lot that goes into company culture. It's a vague and pretty hard to define thing, but the gist of it is, it's the employee experience. It is the experience of the employee when they go to work for you that really defines, I would say, as much as compensation, how happy those employees are and how likely they are to stay with you. It's the work environment, it's the atmosphere, it's your policies and procedures and how they are applied and enforced. It's the people you keep at the company, the leadership of the company, the organization of the company. It's the company's mission, its ethos, how the company conducts itself, both publicly and behind closed doors, that go into company culture. And so it's a lot of things to balance, and a lot of employers don't really think it's something that needs to be managed. But that is so far from the truth. And I'm going to give you an example that hits close to home. I worked for an employer a few years ago who had a manager, an office manager, who was primarily a bookkeeper, but she was also an office manager. And she, we had a few other employees, paralegals, legal assistants. It was a pretty well-functioning firm, a nice firm, but the office manager at the time just really wasn't great. She wasn't a great people person. And she managed to alienate pretty much everyone on the staff who was working beneath her and reporting to her. And before my employer could address the office manager situation and replace her, so many of the staff underneath her found other opportunities. So the moral of the story here is that it takes one person, it takes one toxic personality to demoralize an entire workforce and cost you a number of good employees. And so if obviously as a small business owner, you are busy. You're dealing with client needs, you're dealing with the bureaucracy and the red tape and just the ins and outs of running your business. It's hard to keep on top of company culture. But if you don't, you run the risk of one person driving away so many other good employees that you're not going to get back, and you're not going to be able to replace easily, because you know as well as I do the cost of onboarding good employees, the cost of training them and raising them up and getting them into the position where they can start to get autonomy and take the burden off of you as the person who needs to hire them, train them, and do their job until they learn it. So you don't want toxic personalities demoralizing your workforce and driving your good employees away. And so company culture is really key to keeping your good employees. It's one of those things where toxic workforce or a toxic workplace can take a number of forms. It can look like bad managers who just aren't really good at delegating responsibility or supervising people. It can be your traditional stereotypical toxic workplace where you've got sexual harassment, for example, or workplace discrimination, or a culture of fear or intimidation where people feel like they're being belittled or invalidated or treated as replaceable. One thing that I tell my clients every time, and this is something that's so easy to do and goes such a long way: validate your employees. If your employees believe and feel like they are vital to what you're doing and that they're not easily replaceable and they are not just cogs in the system who can be changed in or out on a whim, they are going to feel more like part of the team. They're going to have more of an investment in their job because they believe that they're actually contributing something that someone else readily can't. And so you're going to keep those employees happier and more invested. So validate your employee. And that means not just you as the small business owner, because again, you're busy, but making sure you have managers in place who are also doing that as part of their supervisory strategy. And so that's company culture in a nutshell. Other things that impact company culture: HR policies that are fair and easy to understand and consistently applied. If you have HR policies that apply to some but not others, that can really drive people away. And if you have HR policies and procedures that are tailored to the lowest common denominator, and I'll explain what I mean by that, but if you do that, that can drive people away. So the lowest common denominator theory is that you need to write your policies for the employees who are doing poorly, who are not performing, and who are, just generally they need constant supervision and micromanagement. If you're writing policies for those people and then applying them across the board, you're hamstringing your high-performing, good employees who you might otherwise reward with more autonomy. If the policy is to micromanage your employees because you have 1 or 2 employees who need micromanagement and 5 or 6 employees who don't, those 5 or 6 employees might go to a different company with a culture that gives them more breathing room. And so as much as it hurts to hear, and as much as it hurts to say sometimes, my recommendation to some clients is, if you've got 1 or 2 employees who are underperforming and 5 or 6 or more who are performing, get rid of those other employees who are not performing, and then redefine your policies and procedures and your incentives and your general workplace dynamic crafted around the employees who are performing. Give them the flexibility and the freedom that they want and need, and the autonomy and the ability to work from home, for example. We've seen it here where some employees handle that better than others. And it becomes a question of, do you reward the employees who can handle it by letting them work from home, or do you punish them because some employees couldn't handle work from home, and so you crafted the policy so that no one can work from home? These are questions you have to answer, but how you answer them and how you craft your company culture is going to define how your employees feel about the company and how inclined they are to stick with it in the long term. And again, I'm just going to hammer this home one more time. If you have folks who are creating a toxic work environment, deal with them quickly and swiftly, because if you let it linger for long enough, that reverberates throughout your workforce, and you're going to have folks leave. Here's a little picture of everyone with their hands in, because company culture, if you have a good company culture, it fosters investment in the company. It fosters personal buy-in of your employees. And that's what you really want. You're not going to get this nebulous employee loyalty anymore because, like I said, there's the factors that drove that back in the old days really aren't there anymore. But what you can get is employee buy-in. And that is so vital for your company mission. You want employees who are invested in the same thing you are, which is providing a product or a service and doing it well and taking some pride in the work you're doing and in your company's reputation. You want employees who care about their employer's reputation, which segues into my final point: mind your reputation. Here's what I think was a graphic of an angry boss looking at their employees. That's how I read this. But company reputation. Again, New Mexico is such a small community. Reputation, a business's reputation is easy to gain, and it is so hard to lose. If I have time after this section, I'll tell you a little story about this. But if an employer is known for being mercurial or quick to anger or difficult to work with, employees are going to steer clear. They just are. And I will tell you plainly, I have worked for employers who have been mercurial, who have been quick to anger, employers who have been known to throw their employees under the bus to save face with customers or clients, even though it was really something well above those employees' heads that caused the problems. If you get known, if you become known in the community as an employer who does these things, who causes these kinds of problems for employees, prospective employees are going to steer clear. And you will start to see that in the applicant pool that you get when you post a job listing. It becomes smaller, it becomes less qualified, it becomes just so much less appealing to you as an employer. If you burn through the workforce with propensity for layoffs, if you're known for laying off employees or burning them out or driving them away, you're going to get fewer and fewer qualified applicants in the future. And, you know, like I said, I've worked for employers like that in the past, and I've had prospective candidates reach out to me asking, what was it like working for this employer? And I gave them the honest truth. I didn't slander or defame my former employer, but I told them this was my experience at this employer. And I know from follow-up conversations that the would-be employer extended an offer that was not accepted to those candidates. And so this is something that you have to reckon with as a business owner, that your reputation will follow you. Similarly, and this goes back to something I covered at the very beginning, if you have a reputation for overhiring when you're busy and then laying off when you're not, you're going to be seen as an unstable employer, and it's going to be reflected in the applicants you get. This is one of those things where if you really don't keep on top of your reputation, it will harm you. And this is something that I threw in last night after seeing yet another controversial statement. I'm not here to tell you what to believe or how to express your beliefs. I'm a firm believer in freedom of expression in this country. But that said, your right to express yourself freely comes at a cost. I don't get to say random things or off-the-wall things without there being consequences. My employer would say the same thing. If I went too off the rails, I might get fired for it. The same is true of employers themselves. If you garner controversy by being one of the employers who posts stuff on Facebook or on your front door about how your employees are lazy and how people are lazy and don't want to come off the unemployment rolls and they don't want to work, and we are making you, the customer, suffer because our employees are making you suffer. If you throw your employees under the bus that way, you gain a reputation very quickly. This is a self-inflicted wound that is so easy to avoid. Every time I talk to clients who are going through this, I tell them just proactively, look, I get your plight and I do sympathize with it, but do not walk the path of controversy because we've seen this with restaurants, even in this town. You can hemorrhage employees if you go this way. So avoid controversy, just make your employees feel validated and supported, and they will validate and support you. That is the gist of it. So one last point here before I jump into the Q&A, and like I said, I got a fun little anecdote if there's no other questions, but utilize your resources. It is so important to reach out and get some quality one-on-one consulting that is tailored to you and your business and really helps you get started on the right foot. The New Mexico Small Business Development Center's no-cost business counseling is such a great resource. I'll tell you, as an attorney in this town, I don't provide no-cost counseling. I just don't. So to have this resource on the table is so valuable and so helpful as whether you're getting started or whether you're going through a transitional phase, you're growing, you're downsizing, whatever it is you're doing. Having this available is just so useful. So like I said, go to nmsbdc.org, check out the no-cost business counseling and some of the other opportunities, and really use your resources, because that's why they're there. And businesses who use their resources tend to fare a lot better in economic downturns, when dealing with economic shocks, or when trying to grow sustainably and plan for the future. It's just use your resources. So do I have any questions? Anyone want to ask any questions or throw anything out there before I jump into this little anecdote to close this off?
So we do, while they're, let me just update everybody while they're thinking of questions, and thank you, Ian, as always. We do have some webinars coming up, and I know he showed you a brief couple of them, but we have Cash is King, Cash Management for Your Small Business, Who's Stealing My Art, Online Plagiarism, Basic Steps to Starting a Business in New Mexico, E-commerce alternative selling methods are the ones that are coming up just at the beginning of this week. So if you need help getting registered for those, I'm glad to help.
Thanks so much. So I've got a few minutes. I worked for an employer very briefly. It's about 3 months. It was sort of a transitional phase for the employer. So I worked for them for about 3 months. I got a job right as they were initiating layoffs. And so rather than be laid off, I just found another employer and jumped ship. But I later found out that this employer actually has a bit of a reputation within the legal community for hiring employees, specifically young attorneys, burning them out, and then showing them the door. And this reputation was such that it actually became kind of a running joke within the legal community, like the community of other law firms, not just young associates, but old attorneys, partners, et cetera. They all knew that this firm had a reputation for doing it. And so, this firm had to enter an appearance on a case, and their attorney was a bit late. And so all the other attorneys started joking, but, oh, it's this law firm. I wonder who they're going to assign to the case now, and I wonder who they're going to assign to the case next week when that attorney leaves. Reputation, it doesn't just follow you with these prospective employees, but it follows you in your larger community networks. And so if you want to get good employees through word of mouth recruiting and networking efforts, keep in mind that your reputation as a small business is going to extend well beyond just the employees who are going to apply on these websites, but it's going to extend to these other business owners as well. So when I say mind your reputation, I really do mean that. It is one of the best things that you can do in the long run to be able to find and keep good employees. So I just want to thank everyone for attending today's workshop. Like Leslie said, lots of great opportunities coming up in the future for other workshops. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via the SBDC. Leslie or whoever at the SBDC can, of course, provide my contact information, or they might be able to answer the questions directly themselves. Like I said, that no-cost business counseling is a great way to get some of your immediate questions answered.
Thanks as always, Ian. Always valuable information. You guys let me know if you need anything, and have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.